And then you would make 25%, or
The
the company
would. Maybe I got 30% commission or something. Albany Road in Coventry, which is about 40 million.
Family business have done huge projects, haven't they?
I believe that across the 3 sites, on the conservative end, the GDV is about 35 million.
Thanks for checking out the podcast. This is From the Ground Up with Rosey Cassidy. Rosey, thank you so much for joining me
You're very
on the
welcome.
podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, for anyone who doesn't know you and your story, could you just give me a snapshot of you and what you do, the different businesses that you own?
Yeah, so I've got 2 businesses with my business partner Tyler. We've got Newman Rose Property Group, which is a property development company. And then we have Property Ed, which was rebranded into that probably start this year now, which is a property education company that specialises in education around property development and also property investment.
Okay, amazing. So you do quite a lot in the property space. You're quite, especially in the development side, I don't see many people doing education or even just doing any kind of development and documenting it on social media. What was it that kind of drew you to the development side of things as opposed to a lot of what people are getting excited about these days with flipping houses, buy refurb refinance, the typical property investing side of things?
Yeah. So my family business, Cassidy Group, is property development. My dad's a property developer, was a builder when he was younger, became a property developer. So I've always been around property. I left school at 18 on a gap year, and my ongoing thing is that I'm still on my gap year because I just started working and then never, went to uni in the end. I was going to do medicine, set on it, and then my dad was like, why just do property? Like, it's the logical thing.
Yeah.
So that's why I went into property, and then naturally my skill set, lended me to not just property development. I also, for many years, did land agency. So like sourcing land development deals, basically. So yeah, the reason property development over, your typical sort of investment flip sort of things was just because that's where my knowledge base was.
Okay. So that's kind of that's really helpful. It gives me a good framework for where you've kind of come from a little bit. But just rewinding it even more, what was it like growing up for you in a family of developers then?
Really fun. So I've got 3 older brothers.
Okay. Are you the youngest?
I'm the youngest
Of all the siblings?
Of all the siblings,
Okay.
and the only girl. So obviously my dad's favourite. And my dad was, building our houses, as in the family home would be being built by my dad. So it was always really fun, and I remember going to dad's sites when I was younger. I think he's got pictures of me and my brothers, hanging from digger buckets, all that sort of stuff.
Nice.
So yeah, it was great, like really good fun, being on site and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then, so you went to school and you're based in the Midlands, right? Always have been?
Always have been, yeah.
Always have been. Went to school, but you never thought when you were at school or going to college, did you do college?
Sixth form, same thing, yeah.
You never thought at that point, I'm going to go into property as well?
No, so I was privately educated in secondary school, and I don't know whether or not this is normal or not normal, but I was always aware that had a cost to it, and I also knew that the cost was more than just what the tuition fees were because of taxes and everything. That sort of conversation was quite open in my household growing up. So yeah. I always felt like maybe this pressure, not directly from my parents, but just generally that because I've had obviously such fortune with my education, I should go on to further education, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
For me, it was always, I'm going to go to uni and I'm going to try and get into the highest uni I can get into. Without really thinking what is it that I want to do, if that makes sense. And then I remember doing, I think UCAS is the name of it, like the application thing.
Yeah.
And being like...
I never went to uni, so I've got no idea. But
yeah,
that rings a bell.
I remember doing all the application and everything and being like, what do I want to do? Like, what am I going to apply for? And I applied for... I really like science. I still really like science. So I applied for paleontology, which is like dinosaurs and stuff.
Yeah. Inspired by friends.
Yeah, medicine and like human sciences or something. Okay. Not really sure. Obviously, medicine is being a doctor, but beyond that, I wasn't really sure what the like career paths were. I was just like, I like science, I guess. So I'll do that. And then, time came, and I was like panicking at the thought of going to uni. So deferred for a year, and then still on my gap year.
Still on your gap year.
Still on my gap year.
But before the kind of leap where your dad said, "Why don't you get into the family business?" There was literally you didn't participate in the in the business in any kind of day-to-day function or
No,
anything like that?
no, not beyond, just hearing conversation at the dinner table. It was never really a thought to go into property. It just was never an option to me. I was always thinking I have to go to higher education. And even then it didn't cross my mind to do something property related in higher education. And then that was it. I got into it because I started working a bit for my dad, and then I was like, actually I quite enjoy this, and then I moved to work in land agency with other people in that first year, and then that was it.
So you did land agency for your dad or for a different
company.
Okay.
It was for Fine and Country originally, which are an estate
Okay.
agent. And I did that for maybe 3 or 4 years. I was a land agent.
Straight out of sixth form.
Yeah.
You went and did land agency.
Yeah.
What was that like? What was the first kind of couple of weeks like for you? What was the first deal that you did? And also, how does that work? Because obviously people understand estate agency, but talk to me about land agency and what that looked like for you.
So land agency for me was, for some reason, the company I worked in, they specialised in off-market only. So there was no like Rightmove ads or anything like that. So we would get land opportunities, mostly through what I call planning leads. So when things go in for planning or get approved, we'd contact them and say, basically, we've got clients, do you want to sell? But what I then brought to the business was my knowledge of site finding. So how I would look for a development site with mapping softwares, planning knowledge, things like that, to then get opportunities on an option agreement for developers. So I'd call them and say, what is it you're after? They'd say, 5 to 10 units in Stratford Council, Solihull Council, Warwick Council, high value areas. It was always a joke. If I could have 5 units in Lapworth or Knoll in Solihull, I'd be the richest person on earth, sort of thing. And then I'd go out and find that and, broker those deals off market for the developers, for the landowners for a fee. It was a 3% fee on purchase price.
Okay.
And that was what I did for 4 years.
Yeah,
I think it was 4
crazy.
years.
That is, but you weren't involved in the business before that, in your family business.
No, not in the day to day. So it always did surprise me how much I knew, but it was just always spoke about at home, if that makes sense. And
you mentioned, you had a skill set in finding off market deals using mapping software and stuff like that. Where did you get that skill from?
Obviously, I had to teach myself how to use the mapping softwares.
Yeah.
But that's, they're quite simple because they're designed for old property developers to use. So that was quite simple. But the planning knowledge as to because obviously not every piece of land can get planning, right? It's only certain ones, and even the ones that can, it's what can they get planning for. Understanding that is, I guess, a skill set, which I didn't realise I actually had just from, if I hear something around me, I remember it. That's that's my USP as a person, is I'm like a sponge. So I guess I just, growing up, just learned it. Obviously, I looked at what my dad would get planning for, and I could kind of understand the journey behind that. Maybe it was a brownfield site and there's a certain amount of massing there, and then logically you're replacing that with residential massing. That all makes sense, and I could translate that into looking at a piece of land and picking it up. Although the first day I ever worked for my dad, he made me sit down and read the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, to obviously learn a bit about it. How long is that? Oh, God knows. Too long. A couple hundred, I don't know, maybe like 150, 200 pages of just boring policy.
Nice.
But sat reading that. But yeah, mostly just from looking, and a lot of people can learn just from looking at what gets approved. That there does tend to be, a lot of the time, not always, some planners are a little bit rogue, but a lot of the time there is a process and there is a logic behind what gets approved. And yeah, I all of a sudden realised I'm quite good at this.
Yeah. So you taught yourself how to use things like the mapping software, but growing up was what gave you the knowledge of
base.
Like how to navigate your way through. Right, you've got a piece of land, but to most people it's just a piece of land.
Yeah.
But how to turn that into something that makes money.
Yeah.
Or to assume that it's not going to make money. You kind of learned that growing up.
Yeah, and things like option agreements and the purchase contracts and generally how you structure those deals. That was all the kind of conversations I had with my dad. And I don't know what prompted that. Maybe I asked, maybe we'd just talk about it. But I wasn't in the office. It would have been, in sort of at the house or in the car or whatever. But that's the conversation we used to have. And then, so I knew the value of an option agreement and getting a site on an option at one price, knowing that when it gets planning it's worth another, and that I can sell that to a developer. So then the two industries kind of came together with being a land agent.
And then you learnt the skills on how to package this up and sell it to investors. We did that for another company. What stopped you from, because 3% of the purchase price, is that post or pre-planning? Is that
at the point of completion?
Okay.
So typically, post. So that was.
So there would be quite a significant amount of value in the land that you were getting a 3% fee from.
Yeah. So depending on obviously development land, it could be a couple of £100,000, it could be a couple of £1 million, and anything in between. So that 3% could be 10, 15 grand, all the way up to 6-figure fees. Obviously, that's into the company. What I took personally was different. The one negative of land agency is the time frames. And I was probably unhappy being a land agent for 50% of that time. But there's always these deals you've worked on and you're trying to get your fee from, and you stay in it, sort of chasing the fee that's could be 10, 12 months, maybe longer down the line. And, ultimately it got to a point where I decided I'm not happy as a person anymore doing this. So I literally upped and left one day, and that was it. I quit.
What was it that made you not happy then? Just how slow it was?
I don't think I was particularly passionate about the work itself. Now, obviously, doing the whole process, I know that probably that early stage is kind of the bit I enjoy maybe the least. So I was just focusing on the part that I now know is my least favourite. And I also knew that, I could earn more doing something else, the same skill set, just applied differently. I was working at the time in Birmingham city centre as well, under a bit of a difficult working situation. So just from that perspective, it just didn't make me happy. That super corporate life, the train every day. I was like, it's not for me.
Yeah, no. It's not good. Birmingham at rush hour.
Yeah, it's not fun.
It's not nice. So, okay. That's really interesting. And then you decided to up and leave. What did you go on to do?
I always remember I had a week completely off work whilst I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just sat in the sun. It was like a really sunny...
you didn't have anything to go on to?
I didn't have anything to go on to.
Okay.
I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just knew I was too unhappy as a person for it to be worth carrying on doing. So I had this week off where I was just like eating fab lollies in the sun. And then I vividly remember it to this day. And I worked for a company that was in a group of companies. So I'd moved from Fine and Country to another company doing the same thing. And within that group of companies, there was a tax specialist in stamp duty, which is what we pay on property transactions, as you know. And the more complex the property transaction, the more opportunities there is to reduce stamp duty. So, for example, development land, there's often a reduction on stamp duty. If you're paying 3% additional loading on residential, there's often ways to knock that off. And it gets really clever, actually. And I find that, I don't know what it is about that, but I find that whole process really interesting. The way you can use, they're not even loopholes, they're reliefs that are available. They're just not really very well known. And the guy that ran that company had a few times mentioned that, if I was to ever leave, like, he'd really appreciate me coming to work for him, because obviously, one, I understood the development side, and then all I had to do was be taught about stamp duty, and I could then talk to developers with a level of understanding that maybe people who didn't come from a development background could. So I did that for a while. That was like I can't remember how long I did that for, maybe 6-9 months.
You went and worked for them?
Yeah, but it was on like a freelance sort of basis, like remotely, kind of commission only, just doing that with agents, and basically get a deal in and get a reduction, and we'd take 25% of what was saved.
Yes.
If that makes sense. If you save 10 grand, we'd take 2.5. And obviously I'd take a fee out of that. And I just did that in a bit of it was quite fun, quite enjoyable, quick turnaround in deal. So I could do a deal 1 month and get paid on it that month. And I was like, this is revolutionary. And it was just nice to kind of take obviously I'd been very unhappy at the previous job. So to just sort of take a bit of pressure off and just enjoy what I was doing was really nice. And it was in that time period I also worked a little bit with my dad. So then I started going back and working with Cassidy Group, and actually feeling like I could bring something to the team at that point. Because when I was younger and I'd done, a month here or whatever before starting as a land agent, it was like, oh, you're the director's daughter. You're just basically, you're not doing anything. You're making tea and reading the MPPF in the corner and getting paid for it. or like I was going to site and helping set out foundations only for it have to be redone later on because I did it wrong or something.
Yeah.
So coming back the second time,
you felt you came back with value.
I felt I'm actually bringing something to the team now. I've got a skill set, I've got contacts, I can add something. So then after about 6 to 9 months with the stamp duty, I started transitioning back into Cassidy Group, and then I don't know what year it would have been. I remember it was the March for some reason of whatever year. It was the year I turned 22 actually, so 4 years ago. I went back to Cassidy Group full time, which was really fun, and yeah, it was great. But yeah, I just did stamp duty for a random like 6 months of my career.
That is a really random thing to have have just kind of done a little bit.
A little
on the
segue
side.
into it. Yeah, it's just a really, I don't know, I geek out on it, but I just find it really interesting the way you can layer these different reliefs and go from, you know, some deals it'd be like a £500,000 stamp duty liability down to like, yeah, well, you got to pay at least 1% down to a 1%, which was maybe 50 grand or something. And it's like,
and then you would make 25%. Or the
company would, and then I think maybe I got 30% commission or something.
Yeah.
So it was, you know, decent enough money.
Yeah.
But that wasn't, whilst I did it, the money wasn't the priority. It was just having, often when I talk to people about like, if they ask for like career advice, I always say the value of headspace. My dad always talks to me about this. If you're ever in a job where you're really stressed and you're really unhappy, you often can't stop and think much beyond sort of like the end of the week. So just being in this job that I enjoyed was quite easy. And, you know, more than enough money for me to live the life I wanted to live, gave me that headspace to stop and think, what do I actually want to be doing? Because I felt like I'd sort of been floating a little bit up to this point. And then, like I say, I went back to, I was like, I do want to be in property. That is what I want. So I went back into family business, focus on high density residential and purpose-built student accommodation. And then it was also during this period that I spoke with Tyler about starting the education business, because I was doing a bit of one-on-one consultancy.
Okay.
And I could see...
Just with anyone who would reach out? Or...
A couple of people would reach out. It was mainly actually land agents that wanted to learn how to do their job better, was how I kind of got into it. But then I was actually like, oh, I can articulate this quite well. Like what you're looking for, what the process should look like. So, and this was maybe 3 years ago when there was maybe 1 or 2 property development educators out there. There might be a few more now, but I just really felt like I could add value. So that's where I spoke with Tyler, and it wasn't called Property Ed. Originally it was called Property Development Mastery was the name. So then, at one point I ended up doing the education and working with the family business.
Okay. So what stopped you from going from college and just going, right, I'm going to come in to the family business? And because I know you said you didn't feel like you could add a lot of value. What stopped you from just staying there, learning what you wanted to learn, and then adding the value that way? Because you kind of went on a bit of a roundabout way of upskilling yourself, whether you kind of did that intentionally or not. But I'm just interested to know what stopped you going. Made you think,
sticking at it.
I'm gonna go into property, but I'm not gonna work for the family business.
A bit of stubbornness of like, I wanna
make my own way.
I want to make my own way. My dad is also renowned for not being good at delegating, so I would really have to forge my own route in my dad's business, and without leaving, I wouldn't have known what that route could look like if I stayed within it, if that makes sense. I would always be like, what do I need to do? What do I need to do next? And I didn't feel fulfilled in that sort of role. So I maybe could have stuck it out, but when I came back, I knew what I could then bring. Whereas I don't know if I'd got to that, I would have got to that point if I stayed. But also I think kind of, again, linking back to that, like when I was younger, like wanting to get a degree to make my parents happy sort of thing, I felt like just working for my dad was a cop-out. So if I'm not going to go to uni, but you're at least going to make something aside from the family business on your own. So yeah, it was like a pride thing, a stubbornness, pride, whatever you want to call it. Which sometimes I look back and think, God, I should have just applied what I knew in the family business. But hindsight, you know.
Yeah. But you didn't just go and do uni just for the sake of it.
No.
You went and did something that was going to be, one, you'd enjoy it, and two, it did upskill you to then apply value in the area that you're in now, but also in the family business.
Yeah, for sure. And I then visited friends at uni and stuff when obviously they all went, and it was the right choice. I would not have dealt well living in uni halls and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, once I started earning money, I was like, I can't go to being a skint uni student now.
Yeah.
So that was it.
I think so many students do this. But as a bit of a side note, I think so many students are just like, I want to live the student life.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to uni as well. And I thought, if I really want to live the student life, why don't I just get a job in a student area and go out go out into town and have a laugh, except I'm not getting into debt, I'm actually making money.
Yeah, that's always, or just visit friends that are at uni. I mean, I've got some mates that would admittedly say they went for the uni experience. Do they regret it? Probably not. Each their own, but yeah, definitely wasn't for me.
Yeah, me too. So the businesses that you've got at the minute, they are the two things you've got going on. The property ed, which is education with Tyler, and then you've also got the development side of the business. Talk to me about some exciting things in both businesses.
Yeah. So it's me and Tyler in both businesses, but it's definitely more me in the development side and more Tyler on the education side in terms of who kind of runs both. Exciting things on the development side. We're about to break ground on our Cambridge site, which has had so many delays with planning, but fingers crossed, last one has been sorted. So we're about to break ground on that, which is super exciting. Long time coming. And we've just agreed the purchase of 3 new sites in really nice areas around the Midlands, which we have been, the land agent we're using, we don't normally use a land agent, but it's a chap called, give him a shout out, Phil Roberts at Brookvale. I worked with him at Fine & Country, so I've known him my whole working career. We've known these land agents since we worked in Birmingham, these landowners. So it's been like an ongoing joke how long the negotiations have been to acquire these sites. There's been deaths in the family, there's been all sorts that have prevented it, but we finally agreed the deal on 3 super prime, like luxury rural sites in some of the best spots in the Midlands. So
all the same seller? All
the same seller, one family, and yeah, the sites are just unbelievable.
Are you able to share a bit about what you think you're going to be able to do with them? I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you are, then make sure that you click the subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss any uploads. It would mean so much to me personally and also really help us out as a channel. So
they're big brownfield sites, basically. They're in, like I say, they're in all 3 of them are in Stratford Council, which, if anyone's watching knows, that's a bit of an uphill battle for us. One of them has views going as far as the Malvern Hills, so it's just unbelievably picturesque, and we're hoping to put one of them we want to put, Tyler always calls it a super home is the phrase he's coined,
like a flagship house,
just something really like wowy on the architecture, providing we can get it through planning, but yeah, just some really nice kind of luxury residential. There'll be some affordable on there as well. Potentially do something on like the eco route. One of the sites has a lake with it, so could do some, there's just so much opportunity there. We haven't gone to the stage of getting detailed drawings yet, but we want to do something really special because at least I'm very conscious that there's only one chance to develop this and we want to do it. We don't just want to put standard houses there. We want to put something wowy to really, particularly that the one site it's in is it a village or a town called Wootton Wowen around here. It's so spectacular that I'd be so disappointed in myself if we did it a disservice by putting, just like standard housing there. So fingers crossed, the council will work with us and we'll get something really special. And have you got,
I know it's really hard to say at this stage, but getting a piece of land like that, getting it agreed, you've got to get it agreed at a price.
Yeah.
And so you've got to therefore know what you think the GDV could be on it. What are the kind of GDVs you're looking at across those 3 sites?
So on this one, on one of the sites, we're buying it in 2 halves. We're buying the first half unconditionally for about 900,000, and then we're buying the other half still unconditionally but on delayed completion for I think like 1.5 million for the other bit. And then the other 2 sites are on actually a joint venture, a straight 50-50 joint venture, because we just couldn't come to an agreement on price simply because it's so difficult to know what we will get at planning. So the value of land for a developer comes from what we can achieve at planning, right? Yeah. So I was like, for us to feel comfortable on the risk profile, the offer for a fixed price would have to be pretty low.
Yeah.
which obviously then the landowner's not happy with. So eventually we just said, look, straight 50-50. Obviously we're going to try and get the absolute most, achieve the most value. You're getting 50% of the profits. And they agreed with that. So that's the sort of deal structure we've gone with.
So they provide the land.
They put the land in.
You fund the planning.
Everything. Planning.
You fund the development.
Fund the development.
Manage the development.
Everything. They sit back and let it get built and make 50%.
Nice.
The reason being because, like I say, we don't know exactly. Well, we've got a good indication. I believe that across the 3 sites, on the conservative end, the GDV is about 35 million. On the top end, if, we get, the top end of what we could achieve at planning in terms of massing, and also we get the top end resales when looking at some of the comparables that have sold recently, it could be, pushing on to the 50 million.
Wow.
But that's why we had to do something like a joint venture because, as you can imagine, the land values then proportionately could be anywhere from like 1 million up to 8 million. So, we're super, super excited about that one. We're going to be obviously documenting the whole process in loads of detail as well.
And then you've got a current one that is, you're about to break ground on it in Cambridgeshire.
Cambridgeshire, yeah.
I've seen that one from a distance, and it looks really exciting.
Yeah, so
how's that been going?
Painful. So really a lot of learning curves on this one. It's took way longer than I would have liked. We purchased it with outline planning. We had to get what's called the reserve matters to be able to start on site. But when we purchased it, I knew there was an opportunity to add a lot of value with getting a bit boring, but a change in the roof design, added a lot of space. So we added about 7,000 square foot of usable space onto the site under what's called a Section 73 amendment to planning. But that took a lot longer than we would have liked. So we got that through, and then we had to do the reserve matters, which again, for a landscape plan, I didn't realise how contentious trees could be to planning officers. I think one of the comments was we suggested, I don't even know what tree, whatever Latin name for a tree. And the tree officer came back and said, well, in maybe like 10 years when this tree reaches maturity, there is a chance that it could fruit and therefore it could be a slip hazard. And I was like,
what?
Really? So eventually we got the landscape plan through. And then it was the discharge conditions. So before you start on site, you've got to discharge certain conditions. And we've had a big hold up on the drainage. But I believe we finally, touch wood, don't know if there's any wood here, touch wood, finally got that agreed, which we're now ready to start on site. So frustrating in terms of timescales. But yeah, fingers crossed, we'll be breaking ground this summer on 17 units in Cambridgeshire.
Okay. Do you know roughly when have you got a team in place?
We've got a contractor lined up. They've got a 4-week mobilisation period from when we signed the JCT contract, which is the build contract. But we can't sign that until we have a start date, which we won't have until we've got everything signed off on the planning. So it should be, this summer at some point, but subject to exact confirmation from the council. But it's getting there, which is good. And yeah, they're not as maybe exciting as we'd like to design, but sometimes certain councils push back on you a little bit, and we had a little bit of pushback on the appearance of these houses. They wanted them to be a little bit more like what people are used to seeing. Not that I think that should be why you design a house a certain way, but you can only argue with planners so much. So they're nice houses. They're not, I'm definitely not as excited about them as I am obviously the ones coming up locally, but it's a really great site, really great numbers in the deal. And yeah, it's a really good one for us to cut our teeth in as a development company as a start off.
Out of interest, what is it that stopped you from, because your family business have done huge projects, haven't they? The Cassidy Group. I mean, could you give me a quick idea of the biggest project, just really rough highlight numbers, biggest project you did with the Cassidy Group that you were involved in?
So there's Albany Road in Coventry, which is about 40 million, 436 student beds. Tied up 2 pieces of land in the Jubilee campus in Nottingham, which combined was maybe about 450 beds again. We had Arkwright Street, which was a PRS, like a purpose-built rental apartment building. I think the red book on that was about so 47 or 57 million, 47 I think. So yeah, it was, a lot of it was what we call high density accommodation.
Yeah.
So
Apartments
apartments
like
or student accommodation.
So you've done some really big projects. What was it that's made you go, do you know what, I'm not going to continue with the family business doing these big projects. I'm going to take on my own business. I'm going to do this myself.
Yeah.
You and Tyler, obviously, as business partners. What was it that drew you away from the family business and into starting your own?
Two things. One, that I want to prove I can do it on my own mindset, which don't know if that helps or hinders. I just wanted to give it a go on my own, basically. And it felt like the right time. Me and Tyler had the one business together that works as a cash flow vehicle for a development business. So it was partly, just wanting to do it on my own. And then in terms of why we went for, your more standard residential over the, high density stuff, is I wouldn't have a track record strong enough with a bank for, if I said, I want £30 million debt for a big student site, because, I've got some links to the family business, but they would have wanted to see probably my dad as involved in the deal. So for us, doing the smaller stuff like Cambridge, my experience profile gave me access to that level of debt, which is still, several million, but not tens of million. So it's kind of like it's a stepping stone. And ultimately we do want to get into big high density accommodation, and some of the sites that I'm in negotiations with now and looking at now are potentially that for the future. But the first sites were going to have to be smaller residential to tick that box with the bank. But also, obviously, on the education side as well, we produce content, right? And it's more relatable to our potential consumer base to deliver, smaller sites of residential housing. I say smaller because if you think of like Taylor Wimpey doing 200 houses, 17 is a small site. It's more attainable. So the sort of content we produce, there's like a flywheel effect between the two businesses in that sense. So it made sense for both aspects of the business to do that sort of site. And also, I'd rather make mistakes on a smaller deal, like the Cambridge one, than a massive deal, which, there have been mistakes made. One, with the timelines it's taken to get to where we are, and two, the other mistake was only having one deal. I wanted to focus on one deal, make the mistakes, but now I'm like sat waiting around. So we've had to build up a pipeline, which we've now obviously started to get. The pipeline sat around 50 mil now, which is great. But it was that was probably the main reason for opting for what seems like an unusual site to go for, but there was a thought process.
Okay, so I've not got a lot of experience in development.
Okay.
I do property investing, flipping houses, property businesses. I've never done development. So coach me through my first deal, right? So what do I need to do, right? If I want to walk out of the building today, and I want to find a Cambridgeshire site, something like that, what's my first step?
First step is looking at kind of your goals, because there's obviously so many different types of development sites. There's PD schemes, converting offices to, residential. There's luxury, there's affordable housing, which has a different funding mechanism to standard housing, or you could do commercial development even. And then there's also the conversation of, do you want to buy a site with planning in place already, or do you want to take it through planning, which has more risk, is arguably harder, but you can add a lot of value. So the first thing is figuring out what type of site is it you want. So, like I say, whether or not it's got planning, and then also, how many units, locations.
Yeah. So you're starting with your goal, what is you want to achieve. Let's say I want the Cambridgeshire site. Let's say I want that one.
Yeah.
So I want to go for slightly higher end, not super luxury, but high end, profitable, detached houses, about 10 to 15 units. And I want it off plan.
Yeah.
No planning.
Okay.
What do I do? So
then you need to understand, what makes one piece of land get planning over another. So that's understanding planning, basically. It's quite a difficult thing to teach, because nowhere in national or local planning does it say, if you bring forward a site that looks like XYZ, you will get planning for this. Yeah. It's like, here's a policy that 3 people could interpret 3 completely different ways. And there's actually 50 policies by which you have to consider, which means there's 150 different combinations of how people might interpret it, because you'd interpret it different to how I would and the planner would, and even your planning consultant might. I across all of that, you then got to somehow figure out what does that mean for a piece of land, which is a big part of what we teach, obviously, in the education programme, is how do we interpret that? And that's an ever-changing thing as well, depending on where the council is with their land supply, for example. But once you understand, why something would get planning, and things to consider are, is it in the development boundary? Is it a brownfield site or is it a greenfield site? What's the housing supply like in that area? Would it be overdevelopment? Would there be any overlooking issues? You're trying to understand. I always say to people, if you can't think of a clear argument as to why, other than, I just think it should, that's not a reason. Yeah. There's got to be a very valid reason why this should get planning. And
is that something I need to decide? Is that something I need to figure out and I need to present?
In terms of when you're looking for sites, so I call it like the site sourcing, in that stage, yes, that's something you need to know, because otherwise you don't know what to approach. You're going to be approaching everything, and 90% of it is never going to get planning. So you need to know, at least in that first instance, when you look at a piece of land, is that an opportunity or not? If it is, yes, well, then we do certain site checks. So we're now looking more intra-site. So is it in a flood zone? Are there any listed buildings? Any TPO trees? Is there any risk of contamination on the site? Any major red flags that would mean we're not going to approach this? Once we've gone through that process, we then get a list, basically, of... Okay. And this is one part people don't understand. It's not 10 sites, it's not 20 sites, it's hundreds of sites, because you're basically, it's like cold calling.
So it's lead gen, isn't it?
It's lead gen, yeah. And so there has to be massive output, massive effort, massive volume at the start. Send all your letters out. Yeah. Once you get a response, that's when you'd probably bring in your planners, and then they'll start justifying why it'll get planning and what for.
Yeah, so just so I can keep up. So I go out. I need to learn the skills and the knowledge around what gets planning, why does it get planning, the typical kind of, a council might look at something and go, yes, this will get planning and this is why. No, it wouldn't, and this is why.
Yeah, like the green flags, the red flags.
Yeah, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but there is like a...
There's loose legislation.
Slight method to the madness. Okay, so I learn about that. I then need to identify sites...
based on that.
Based off of that. I then send out letters, I'm assuming, find the owner on land registry.
Oh, yeah, missed that point. So we have different mapping softwares. There's loads out there. We use one called Searchland. You can buy the title information off of there. How you then go about populating your letter, use virtual assistants, mail merging, all sorts of different methods. But yeah, send out bulk.
Hundreds, thousands of letters
bulk
to
volume.
Sites that you think could fit the criteria that you've identified. And then, okay, so someone gets back to me, hey, I'm really interested in selling my really big garden. What am I doing here? Am I just negotiating with them? What's the ideal outcome with the seller? What's the conversation that I want to be having, and what's the end goal that I'm trying to steer them towards? Yeah,
so in the situation where you want to take the site through planning, your end goal is agreeing an option agreement. So an option agreement is a purchase contract which gives you the option but not the obligation to purchase that property or that piece of land for an agreed period of time at an agreed price. So the beauty of an option is you're not having to buy that land until planning is achieved. So obviously, and if planning isn't achieved, you're not buying the land.
Yeah.
So as a developer, it buys us time and de-risks the deal. So that's the objective, is getting that option agreement signed at obviously a price that works. So that's what your negotiation's then about. So that first phone call for me, it's about introducing yourself, building a bit of rapport, also understanding the motivations behind, you normally get between a 10 and 15% response rate on letters.
Really? That's quite high.
With including follow-ups, that is. So follow-ups are super important.
Yeah.
You can't just send the one letter, you've got to hound them until you get a restraining order.
How many times do you hound them?
Definitely.
Every day? Every week? Every month?
Yeah. So normally 4 weeks after the first letter.
Yeah.
And then 2 months after that next letter, and then like every 6 months, basically.
Okay.
Until I forget.
So they clearly got the letter, there's follow-up. That's a really high percentage, because I do that for houses. The response rates are low.
What sort of percent?
Like we're talking 0.5 to 1% response rate.
Wow.
Yeah, seriously low. Although I don't necessarily always identify the perfect super rundown house, sometimes I'll just go blank. We're looking at something in this area. Let's just send letters to everyone. That is super low. Anything that's more targeted, I do find the response rate is higher. But again, we're talking about 1 to 2%.
Wow, I'm
really low.
That.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because you have more people approaching. Your stock versus the sort of stuff I approach potentially.
And a lot of people know how to sell a house. Not many people know how to sell land.
Yeah, and my approach letter always stresses, who I am. I stress that it's their land specifically that I'm approaching. It's not I'm sending letters to every piece of land locally. It's your land.
Yeah.
And I stress that I believe that land has development potential and I have an active need in my business that their piece of land would satisfy. So I kind of create a little bit of, there's a demand here. Somewhere anywhere between sort of 10 and top end would be probably 15 might be a bit high, maybe 10 and 13.
Yeah.
But once someone gets a response, I want to understand the motivations. Why were they one of the people that called us back? Because that can be quite telling in terms of then going into your negotiations moving forward. And another thing I like to say is, assuming we can get to the right price, price aside, is there anything else that would stop you selling your land? Because you want to know what would their other future objections potentially be. And it might help you with deal structure and your general offer to know. Sometimes timelines are important to them. They might have a business there that they need to move. They might need new premises. They might actually want to stay in one of the houses. Getting creative with the deal structure, with development, you can do anything basically. So understanding that's really important.
Who can support me in that? So someone says to me, I want to sell my land, but I want to stay in this house. And I also want to, I don't know, makes a bit of an uplift on any planning gain that you get. Who do I speak to? Is that solicitor that will put that into writing, into an agreement, or is that something you just agree directly with the seller and you specify it on some kind of a heads of terms, or what is that? Is that specified in the option? If you're interested in property investing or you want to start and scale a property business, then I'm running some training to teach you how to do that very, very soon. I teach people how to build a 6-figure sourcing business. I teach people how to flip houses and make huge profits. And I also teach people how to start and scale their own property investment portfolio. If that sounds like the kind of thing you'd be interested in, click the link in the description and you can find out more. It would genuinely be an honor to be able to help you.
So, really, in terms of putting that creative deal structure together, that's the skill of being a developer. That's one of the skills that there's certain skills that you can kind of outsource, engineers and things, but getting creative with deal structures and packaging it really is on you to learn and get creative with. Typically then I would put kind of like a heads of terms together, and then that would go to a solicitor, and terms within that would then form the option agreement. You can, if you wanted, if you weren't as confident, maybe get a land agent involved. It would depend on the skill set of the land agent. So,
and also, surely they'd want a piece.
They'd want a piece. So it's a skill I'd really recommend any aspiring developer or active developer really home in on. Because it's in that negotiation that you're going to make money in your deal. If you get that negotiation right or wrong, that's like it's backbone.
It's something I always say with houses is the profits in the purchase.
100%.
Actually, if you can purchase it at the right price, your money's locked in. You're a lot more safe.
100%.
You can develop something out, and you might go over, but if you've got it at the right price in the first place, it's really, really important. And I think it's something I've explored the land sourcing side a little bit when I've looked into developments. The land sourcing really interests me because I know that there's a lot of money to be made.
Huge amounts.
Because the profits in the purchase. So I've got a seller. They've agreed to sell. We've got an option agreement with them. I've got myself, I don't know how long you give it, a couple of years on an option, a couple of years?
Nowadays, 12 months is the most common option period. Solicitors, landowners are getting a bit more queued up on putting pressure on developers. So typically you're looking at a 12-month option. They do have standard extension rights. So if there's a live planning application, it extends until the outcome of that. So you're not going to kill, because obviously sometimes planning's out of your control. You're not just going to lose your contract. Typically 12 months. And obviously in that time frame, you're going to pursue planning. And the overall objective is sort of taking a step back. We have to do something called an appraisal, which, I'm sure you do with your deals as well. Essentially, what are the numbers in the deal? So that's how we figure out what's the site worth, what can I offer? And ideally, we'll do an appraisal and we say this piece of land that we found in Cambridgeshire, wherever it is, we think we can get 12 units. And we think when it's got planning, if I was to put that on Rightmove or sell it to a developer, I could sell it with the benefit of planning for £1.1 million.
Okay.
Fantastic. But I'm taking on all the risk. I'm taking on the time. I'm putting in the investment. Obviously, I'm not going to pay 1.1, which is the de-risked value for the risk profile. So then it's, well, what am I going to offer? And the idea is obviously you agree it as kind of cheap as possible, and that's the profit in the land. So depending obviously what the site is will kind of dictate what it might be worth. If it was like our Cambridge deal, which was just a field, a really, you know, barren kind of field, not big enough for agriculture, you know, that original purchase off the farmer could have been, you know, might have offered £300,000 for what's basically an acre of land, and they're thinking, you know, the going rate is like 10 grand an acre. They're like, happy days.
Yeah.
You're also saying happy days, because if I get planning, you know, there's what, £800,000 less planning costs. Let's, you know, call it 700.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't even be that expensive, and it definitely wouldn't be for 10 units. But you know, that's the objective basically in this process, is you're identifying land you think it's got potential,
and I appraise it myself.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's another skill. So we've got so go through quickly just the skills I've got to learn at this stage. So I've got to learn
planning,
kind of everything, but
bit
summarise.
Planning,
sourcing, how to actually
deal structure. Yeah, the sourcing process, I guess, the systems and process behind deal structures and negotiation.
Yeah. And appraisals. How you actually
figure out what it's worth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've done that. I've got an idea. You make your offer. That gets accepted, and then great. We've got an option on something.
Full steam ahead.
What's my next step? What does that mean?
Planning. So that's when you obviously engage with your architects. You may have engaged with them sooner. Sort of when you bring them in is kind of a personal preference. Get your architects involved. Get plans drawn up. You'll need certain reports doing, like topographical surveys, and then depending on the site, you might need other types of surveys as well. With the objective being get it into planning basically as quick as possible.
Yeah.
And then it's over to the lords that be at the planning department.
And the architects, can they oversee? Because you're talking a lot about, and you mentioned it earlier, a lot of things like reports and surveys and things. Is that something, again, you have to do, or can your architect kind of coach you through that at that stage?
Your architect can massively coach you through. And that, like, for example, our architects, they'll often say you're going to need this transport survey, and they'll normally go, and here's 2 quotes already that the companies they work with. And if I want, I can go out and get my own quotes, or normally I'm just like, yeah, fine, go with them.
So an architect can take a lot of the burden. So the right architect is massively
hugely
valuable.
Important.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, having the wrong architect could really make or break a deal, both from whether or not you get planning, but also what you get planning for. Because if they design something that, you know, for example, looks amazing, they design the Shard, but they design it in a part of Birmingham where the resales are scraping £200 a square foot, but the build costs are £450 a square foot. Great, it's got approved, but we can't build that. It's unbuildable. It's not viable. So having the right architect that's going to get you planning, but also for something buildable, is really, really important. And then obviously one that can support you in the overall process as well. I lean on my architects loads. The amount of times I'm like,
what do you mean by the overall process? Where can you pull in an architect where people may not be aware they can?
As in the overall process of planning. So, you know, my architect is my point of contact with the planners. So all of the little general inquiries, I don't hear about them. The architect just deals with them.
He comes to you and says, you need to get this report. Here's 2 quotes. And you go, great, here we go. And you got to pay for that to get done. Yeah. And that's it.
But small things he can answer. It doesn't go through me to go to him. He just handles that process.
Yeah.
You can also, at the earlier stages of deal sourcing, obviously sometimes at a cost, have them involved in sort of the appraisal process. So if you're unconfident in, there's a software called ProMap, which is like a drawing software. Well, that's what I use it for. And I call them blobograms, put little squares on my page. I know how wide a road's got to be. I know how big a garden's got to be. And I can quite confidently figure out on most sites, roughly, you know, how many houses of what size I can get on it. Other people aren't as confident as that. So they might use an architect to do what's called a viability study, which is just a quick drawing basically to say, here's 5 houses, you could get 10 houses, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So you could involve an architect at that stage. And then also they'll be involved moving forward into construction and the tender process with builders, things like that, doing the working drawings.
Yeah.
They're probably the one you have like the most contact with, I'd say.
Okay, so you go through with them, you get planning accepted, you then everything gets approved, and then it becomes a case of get your construction team in, break ground and get cracking, build them and sell them.
Yeah, put very, very simply.
Yeah. But, it's that easy as well.
It's that easy. Once you get planning, you've then got to do certain, discharge conditions. So having planning doesn't mean you can start on site.
Okay.
So you've got to jump through some more hoops, obviously. 'Cause it's
what
the planners.
hoops are they?
Depends on the site. So there's certain standard things like construction management plans, which is just saying, where things going to be stored, what the traffic flow look like. You've got to submit them. You might have to prove there's no contamination on site. You could have things like archaeological issues that need sorting prior to works commencing. Drainage designs need to be approved.
And again, your architect can support you with all of this.
Support engineer starts getting involved at this stage as well. But yeah, depending on the site and the amount of detail that was submitted with the initial application will dictate what pre-commencement conditions you have associated with your approval. But basically, they need we call it discharging, basically to say, yeah, you've completed it, we're happy, before you're allowed to technically start on site. Okay.
You can see how a development business could grow, because I'm thinking about all the different stages we've gone through, and how actually when you've got your whole team in place, ready to go, it's not like it is a lot of work, but you're managing a team that specialise in a section of the process throughout the whole thing. Yeah. I really like that. It's really interesting. I like it.
Yeah, it is a very scalable business. For me, I think the biggest bottlenecks tend to be at the acquisition stage, because
the sourcing,
because that requires a lot of, I've got to sign off on the offers, I've got to put the offers together. Even if I get someone to do a lot of the initial looking for sites and sending the letters, there's still a bottleneck of, in this situation, me. So getting enough volume through at the front end can be a bottleneck, and also finance. A lot of people
struggle to raise the finance.
I don't even realise you can raise things like equity. So it's their own equity piece, which is the limiting factor, which means they may only be able to do one deal at a time. So that tends to be the two bottlenecks most people have in a development business, is lead flow and the finance, but mainly the equity. It tends not to be the access to debt that's the issue.
Yeah. Okay. That's really cool. That's really interesting. Okay. So if I want to, or anybody listening or watching, if they want to get into development and they want to make 500 grand this year, what would you tell them to do?
And they want to make it and cash it in this year?
Yeah, let's say that.
It's going to be deal sourcing. You're not going to, one deal, if you want to take it through planning, build it out within 12 months, it's going to be a smaller deal, so it's most likely not going to have £500,000 in. So realistically, you're going to be looking at deal sourcing, which it's very achievable in a year if you get the volume out. For example, just thinking of on the student sites that I did with my dad on the Triumph Road in Nottingham, which was the Jubilee campus. We just flipped that on to a student provider, never built it out, and it was over £2 million basically just for flipping the land on. Yeah. And that was less than 12 months deal cycle. So, and that's not, obviously you need some specialist knowledge around student there, but the numbers are big in property development. So if you find the right deal or couple of deals that there's good margin in, there's an agent that I know in Nottingham that if he brings the right deal, he gets 100 grand. As long as the deals stack and it works, he gets 100 grand. So obviously he's got a good knowledge base that justifies that, but providing you, and that's all very learnable. We're not talking about open heart surgery here. It's all stuff that's available online. It's all available out there. There's a lot of resources. Get knowledgeable on it. Know how to find good deals. Know how to stack and package good deals. Developers will pay for it because it's a skill a lot of developers lack. So deal sourcing, either assigning options or selling it on once you've got planning. 100% if you wanted to make.
So you get an option. So say you want to sell a piece of land. I get it agreed with you on an option contract. There's an assignable option. We agree, I don't know, 100 grand for it. I then go and get planning on it. I then get the value up to 600, 700 grand,
Yeah.
sell it to a developer who would say, great, I will pay you £500,000 to have the option to buy this land for 100 grand.
So, there's two main mechanisms. One, you can actually assign prior to planning. So if you found a site that could be worth, let's say, £1 million when it's got planning, and I can see that by running my own numbers. I go, yeah, it's probably worth £1 million. I can see why it probably should get planning, so I justify that risk. But you say, look, I've got it on an option for 300 grand. And I go, okay, well, let's say £500,000. Let's say it's not as much. So it's £500,000. Cost me 50 grand to get planning for 10 units, let's say. So it's 450 grand fat still in this deal. And you say, but I want 100 grand for assigning that option. I might go, okay, so there's still pay planning, get my 10 units. There's still 350 grand. Yeah. Providing there's still enough at that top end, you can justify an assignment fee.
Okay.
So that's one option, is assigning it over prior to planning, and you just walk out and literally they replace you in the contract. Or we typically do a back-to-back transaction, so simultaneous exchange of completions. Yeah. If you've got planning, only because it's more legally secure in terms of the contracts. So in that situation, you've got it for £500,000. Let's say, go back to that same example. You come to me and say, Rosie, got this site, got planning, de-risked it, got all the reports, I want £1 million for it. I do the numbers, I think it's worth that. I say, okay, yeah, I'll give you $1 million, or it might be 950, might be 1.1. Different developers will come to slightly different numbers. It's normally within 10%, I'd say. You pick who you want to go with, and on the day of completion, I send you £1 million, or your solicitor's £1 million. Your solicitors send £500,000 to the landowner. I then become the owner of that land, and you walk away with £500,000 and laugh all the way to the bank, hopefully. Nice.
Okay, amazing. So what's the? I'll wrap up. With a couple of questions. What's the game plan for you? What's the end game? Where do you see this going? And is there a goal that you are looking to attain where you go, I did it?
I wouldn't say I've got a goal that's like the I did it moment. Really, to be honest, it's this year I'd like to hit £100 million pipeline. So that's the goal for 2023. I don't have that sort of life goal of, if I get a private jet or if I'm a billionaire, I've made it. I think for me, it's I want to continue to improve year on year and enjoy it at the same time. Providing I've done that, I think I've made it. But the longer term goal is to get into retained assets, basically. So income generating, kind of it would be a fund model essentially. So we'd have a lot of investment on the equity basis from private investors, bring in the debt piece, and we'd develop things with the intention of retaining them for either the long term or for a stabilisation period, and then bolt together a portfolio and sell it onto one of your big pension funds, Aviva, Heinz, whoever it might be, that wants it, and then repeat. I'd also like to get into sort of the affordable housing space a bit more. I think there's a lot more that can be done in the UK with that by adding a bit more commerciality to it. Again, under a fund model, but that's the main goal is, at the minute it's build to sell. In the future, it'll be build to retain on large scale. Yeah.
And ultimately down to the core of what it is that drives you. Why do you do what you do?
Good question. Having obviously worked in corporate space, I don't really like it. I don't like having to be in at 9 a.m, even though I tend to start work before 9 and finish after 5. If you tell me I have to sit at this desk from 9 to 5, then I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. So obviously the flexibility of running my own business, I enjoy. Within the two businesses we have, one, development is so varied. What we can do, one day I could be on site, the next day I could be negotiating with my landowner, the next day I could be in a design meeting. It's so varied, my day-to-day work. And then if you add in my work, things like this, doing a podcast is part of my job. It just means my day is really varied, which for me keeps my attention because I get bored. So and I enjoy it. So
it's the freedom piece.
It's the freedom piece, and like I say, it's varied, so you just can't get bored. So you can't think about doing any of the jobs when you're not bored.
Yeah, amazing. Rosey, thank you so much for
No worries. Thank you for
jumping on
having
the
me.
podcast. I think what you bring to the development space in the UK is really, really valuable.
Thanks so much.
I know a lot of people that speak very highly of you and Tyler, what you guys do.
Thank you.
I think it's really impressive what you've managed to achieve at the age you have. I think you've got a really exciting business model, and I can't wait to see how it goes
Amazing. Thank
over
you.
the coming years. So thank you
you
so
for having
much.
me. Brilliant.
Thanks for checking out the podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then make sure that you click the subscribe button and also hit the bell notification so you don't miss an upload. We're on YouTube, but we're also on all podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Also, don't forget to check out the link in the description if you're interested in finding out more about the property investment education that I provide.